Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digital Badge Academy's webcast. We have a really special guest here today to talk about digital credentialing, and we're going to let David Leeser introduce our guest today.
Thanks, Jim. And this is a really great opportunity to meet with Noah Geisel. Noah is the Micro-credential Program Manager at the University of Colorado Boulder, and he's also the co-founder of the Badge Summit. And Noah, I think we met 7 years ago in the earlier days of badge program development, and things have come a long way. And I don't think we've ever had a chance to catch up and really capture all your ideas. So I think this is going to be a great opportunity for people to learn from you on where badges are going and how the whole credential landscape is starting to change in higher education.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thanks so much, and it's a big honor. I'm definitely a big fan.
So, Noah, obviously, this is the first time I'm meeting you, so it's a real treat. I've definitely heard of you, and I've seen what you've done with the Badge Summit and things of that nature. And obviously, University of Colorado Boulder has had a big involvement in the digital badging and digital credentialing space. For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, um, could you provide sort of an overview, background, how you got started, got exposed to digital credentialing and badging, and a little bit about what you've been doing in that space?
Sure. Yeah, and I got exposed honestly because of Twitter. I just was very lucky to be following, some of the right people at the right time when the first DML competition was happening and, early MozFest gatherings where, the kind of people who I look to as some kind of Mount Rushmore and some of the godfathers of the space were conceiving things and, for free. I was just seeing their micro ideas on Twitter and started to just think as a frustrated, high school teacher in a really innovative school district that was showing Sir Ken Robinson TED Talks about, what the real future of, teaching and learning was about skills, but then turning around and rating teacher effectiveness on, student performance on knowledge level multiple choice questions. And I just started to see these things they're talking about might be one of the right answers to the question of how do we notice, name, and recognize in formal ways, the stuff that they're saying really matters. If we're going to say empathy matters, creativity matters, awareness, critical thinking, analysis, well, let's, you know, do that. And so for me, I was it was less of a, you know, I believe in this and more just, I don't believe in this, what we're doing. I was frustrated. And then once I dove in, that's when the inspiration really hit. And it just very quickly was just so clear to me that, this stuff has a really good chance to not be flavor of the week, that it's going to be ubiquitous and it's going to be just change the world stuff to help us do things like connecting humans with opportunity in ways that are based on merit and skills and competencies and not who they know or race, gender, last name, and things like that. So that's sort of the how I got into the space. And that we got on the radar early days in Aurora Public School project we were doing, got on the radar of the Clinton Global Initiative. And through that, we had to submit an action plan to the CGI, and it included putting on a conference. We said, that there's a lot of brilliant people in white paper land, but in execution land, there's not necessarily the community of practice that, where we can be learning and sharing together. And so we said, let's share our work, but let's also open it up to others to share. And that, that's how I, encountered David. I remember it was very cool when we saw an email come in. It's like somebody from IBM has heard of our conference that we're making up and wants to come share. And yeah, Lisa Tadario was building at Salesforce, at the time, the same thing. And so this was kind of early validation that, this is not just us being crazy. There's other people being crazy with us and really believing that this is the future.
How did you get people interested in I mean, what did you do to, because obviously you did very quickly, you were able to make traction, get your conference off the ground. And I don't know, did you then implement digital badges in the Aurora Public School system? Or, what were some of the early, activities you did to get things moving?
I think, kind of thinking out loud, I think is definitely helpful because it doubles as, ways to seek thought partnership and also to socialize, right? And so, we early days started just a hashtag badge chat, and just we're gathering people from all over the world every Monday night, at whatever time it was in your time zone. And, for an hour, and I think later we switched to half an hour, just kind of talking around a topic. But as a result, you started to connect with other people, and, you're not just talking about your work, but the next conversation you're sharing about their work, right? And so I think that in some ways, just thinking out loud kind of doubles as marketing, getting the word out, especially in a moment when people are hungry, because a lot of us, even still in 2023, there's a lot of people who are still kind of on an island doing this work. And so being able to find other people, who, can throw you a life raft and help you, show you where the water is and where to get shelter, and help you avoid mistakes they've already made, is just invaluable, right? And so I think that part of it was just right time, right place. Part of it was being lucky and making some of the right moves, and I think a whole lot of it was community building. When I was in the consulting space before CU Boulder, I used to describe myself as a digital badge community organizer, and I think that kind of had a lot to do with it, just attracting you know people to the space who are passionate about changing the world, and audacious enough to think that they're actually going to do it.
So Twitter chats and social media was a big impact.
100%, 100%. And then, I think also executing, right? Like not just sitting back and, you know, planning out things that are going to be perfect, right? But saying, you know what, what was really lucky early on to get a lot of great mentoring in design thinking, human-centered design approaches, and just basing in empathy, basing it in prototypes that are small so that you can learn, iterate, improve. And so just having that kind of humble approach to, we're not going to get it right, but let's launch something
Mhm. Yeah.
as close as we think we can get to right out of the gate, and let's pay really close attention to it and be willing to, make changes as we go to respond to our users.
So Noah, the thing that comes to mind is, and I think you'll probably share this sentiment. I see a lot of things that I think work really well in the world of digital badging and digital credentialing. I see how it's matured over the past 7, 8 years or so that I've been involved in it, and David's been involved in it. But I also, at the same time, feel like there's a lot of runway in front of us in terms of what digital credentialing can really do. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you think um, we have right today about digital badging and credentialing, and where you think there's a good measure of room for improvement. Any thoughts you have on that?
I guess I have some, and at the same time, again, will anything we think is right now, probably in 6 months or 6 years, we're going to realize that we didn't know the half of it. So, with that kind of caveat, I think that, something that's right is I'm increasingly seeing people talk about ecosystems. I think that for a long time, there were very few people thinking, about, okay, who else is involved in this besides just, content creator, issuer, learners, right? The ecosystem, in order for this to be meaningful, has some essential other stakeholders that, in our designs, if we're not thinking about them, we're probably not moving towards decisions that are going to stay made. And so I think that that's one thing that, increasingly we're seeing is, more people thinking about, and that's probably one of the things that in hindsight will look like a good move. I'd also say that one of the things I'm starting to see on the vendor side is, and I'd say this is especially on, both on the, you know, digital credentials, but also, as we think, going back to that notion of ecosystem, is, once you have credentials, where do you store them, right? These notions of contained bigger envelopes for the smaller envelopes, and shipping envelopes, right? So things like wallets and things like learning and employment records. And I'm increasingly seeing on the vendor side, UI that centers the earners as primary users. And I think that is a big shift that, a couple years ago, if you went to, an online conference or do like a CLR showcase or an LER showcase, a lot of the products you were seeing were, especially in the higher ed space, kind of centering people like registrars, which is, the unit I'm housed in, which I have a lot of affinity for. And, you know, registrars, admissions officers, important user groups to things like oriented employment records. And if the learners themselves aren't accessing these, using them, displaying them, sharing them with consumers, early and often, then I think we're just kind of doing something that's a shinier, sexier, more expensive version of traditional practices and not anything that's transformative. So those are two kind of really good moves that I'm seeing. I think that's something that I wish I was seeing more is people, kind of really digging in as they get a better sense of, what things like these envelopes are, like digital badges, and the power of the metadata that I'm seeing, a lot of quality credentialing programs that then when you look at the artifact, the digital badge that's issued with it, they're not doing that much more than kind of a digital version of what they would have gone to the bookstore and printed out on a piece of fancy paper, right? There's this opportunity to contextualize and uptext, if you will, the learning achievement and really share a narrative there that helps, show this individual, right, of Jim and David and Noah and I'm not seeing enough of that, I don't think, because I think that as we move into, some of those other ecosystem stakeholders like, human resource, um, software, once they start coming around and consuming these things in meaningful ways, not just as attachments in machine readable ways, I think that institutions that are taking advantage of the metadata and issuing digital credentials that do have all that extra context information are going to be equipping their earners with a competitive advantage over institutions that, you know, by probably not knowing better, it's probably not because they're choosing not to do it, it's because they're making a choice without realizing they're making a choice, kind of leaving points on the floor on behalf of their earners and learners.
That's a really interesting point because and it's really interesting about the evolution of badges. When we created the badge program at IBM, we were hung up on the shapes and the colors and all this visual representation of an achievement. That's what we were really interested in. And we were literally down to don't use hexagons because that doesn't look corporate enough, things like that. And how many colors can we put on whatever? But it's all about the data. It's all about the information. And we were talking to Denise from My Inner Genius just on another webcast. And she was talking about a big company. I don't want to mention the name of the company, but it was a large company with about 30,000 employees. They ran them through Minor Genius. Minor Genius reveals a person's hidden capabilities, all those human capabilities you were talking about. And but then it badges them as well. And so what they found was they found that they started to analyze the data and they started looking at the data. They looked at the data on who has a college degree, who doesn't have a college degree, men, women, minorities. They looked at all this data. Well, they found all kinds of very interesting things. They found that people who had college degrees did perform no better in the workforce than people that did not have a college degree. None. They found that they had a higher propensity for learning, or there was a couple things that they validated. It was a big validation study. The second thing they found that there were an enormous number of women and minorities in this organization that were in low-level positions that should have been elevated to managerial positions or leadership positions, but they didn't have any kind of they didn't have a golden pedigree. They didn't have the papers for it. They didn't have a college degree. They didn't have the job history. But what they had was these human capabilities. Say, you are a born leader. And so the badge information that they got out of My Inner Genius elevated these people. And it's astonishing to me that, and I'd love your viewpoint on this, that organizations aren't doing that. And maybe you have maybe you have a recommendation for either HR or for higher education on what they should be doing with that data.
Yeah, I've heard. I honestly anticipate that it's similar to what the project there at a large employer. That there's a whole lot of projects like that that we're just not hearing about because they see it as kind of a proprietary, company advantage to keep that internal. But we are starting to hear anecdotal stories similar to this, right? Of big companies where they are looking at the data and you know one of the value propositions that we talk about this is better hiring, but one of the other things that I think is hugely valuable, in industry is the retention space as well, right? And so it's not just hiring the right people and getting them on the bus. It's identifying the right places on the bus for them, right? And it's looking at, I heard somebody else who told a story where, they're doing this work internally at a company that we've all heard of, where, they wanted them to look at this one team, like what's going on with this one team where everybody leads, what's wrong with the manager of this? And they did all this skills kind of work and found actually like that's the best manager in your company, and like that's the team that grooms people. Like they're leaving because they're getting poached internally,
Right,
right?
right,
And so so there are these really great data insights, and but it's also ways of finding out. So many times people want to get in the door with an employer, right? And so the job that they're in is not necessarily the one they want, right? And
right,
but at the same time, it's not necessarily a safe thing to say out loud, right?
right.
But skills can reveal that. I think the other thing that it can do is, is wayfinding, right? That I've heard people describe it as, a kind of conceptual shift from viewing things as a career ladder to a career jungle gym, right? That your next job is not the one that your boss currently occupies. It might be over here behind a curtain you didn't know existed, but that HR is going to look at your skills, look at your interests, your passions, and they're going to be able to say, hey, this might interest you. Let's introduce you to a hiring manager over there internally. And so I think that we're going to start to see a lot of efficiencies there. And, I think it really benefits humans, but, I think transparently, a lot of the reason why this is going to be ubiquitous is for an IBM, for this 30,000, person employer that she worked with. It affects the bottom line, right? If they can keep people longer, if they can keep them in places where they're happier, that's a lot of money. And so there's huge incentive structures, for both on the human side and on the cogs on the wheel side, and I think that just kind of another kind of tangent off of what you're talking about with skills is a huge piece of the ecosystem that we talked about is skills-based hiring.
Mhm.
That's going to be another thing that affects the ubiquity, and that I work for a R1 research university. I believe in the power of higher education. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that we're actually, despite enrollment cliff that everyone's talking about with the so-called traditional college undergraduate, that we're about to see unprecedented demand for upskilling and reskilling. So I think there's always been a place and always will be a place for higher ed. And I think that, on the employment side, on the admission side, that we got really accustomed to using, pitchforks to move a bunch of hay out of the way to find our needles. And we, our pitchforks were tools like a degree, right? And using these proxies, an ACT score, right? That we were using these proxies of things that we, thought might hint at the skills we want, instead of just saying, these are the skills we need for the job. And I think that it's just a pitchfork's just not the right tool. It's the right tool for moving hay, but a magnet is a way better tool for finding needles, right? And so I think that as we if we can tag our needles in smart ways by noticing, naming, and credentialing the skills and the competencies and the passions, then we can develop software that, instead of just looking for these blunt, imperfect proxies, can look for what we're actually looking for to find those needles and just not touch the hay.
But
Yeah.
and that underscores the importance of what you mentioned before, right? And that is ensuring that what's inside that badge, that container, in the way of credential data, that it be, that it come with sufficient detail, right? And structure and so forth, so that it makes it easier, right? And there was a while back that we had a webcast, and it's something, and it still stands out to me today. The individual that we were speaking with said that, ultimately the vision is, with digital badges, is, and using those for representing credentials of all types, is that we can move from a situation where people are looking for jobs and instead jobs are finding people. And I think that that gets to the heart of what you just said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that does happen, right? Like coaches, going to the admissions and coaches, the volleyball coach knows they need a setter, they need spikers, they need somebody who's great at leadership, like, and they go out and recruit the individuals they need to fill roles, right? They're, companies, there's whole firms, doing recruiting, right? But what if instead of just looking for people on LinkedIn who had X number of months or years of experience in Y roles, they're looking for people who've been credentialed and the skills that they know they need to fill the role that that they're going to get a bonus for filling.
You mentioned the magnet, and I have so many different ideas around all of this. It's interesting. George Westerman, who's a professor at MIT, said I was on a panel with him at ASU GSV, and he said,
Mm.
I wouldn't rely on the MIT degree to hire somebody. I would assess them. I would provide an assessment for them. And I think that behind all of this is some sort of assessment and a badge behind it. But back to this whole idea of the magnet and the opportunities for higher education. What do you think? Because I agree with you. I think that higher education has an incredible opportunity here if they break down the walls and they start to rethink it. And how do you think badges can help higher education break down those walls?
And honestly, I don't know if it's even about the badges, right? Like, I know, like at the end, that's one thing that, so depending on where you are, some of the vocabulary, means 10 different things to 10 different people. And so just briefly at CU Boulder, we decided that digital badge and micro-credential are two different things.
Hmm.
We use the word micro-credential as a programmatic term. So a unit wants to propose a micro-credential, it gets reviewed, it gets approved, it gets offered, learners declare for or enroll in a micro-credential program, right? And digital badges are the artifacts that we use to communicate successful completion or attainment of the credential. And so an analogy that my boss the registrar uses is that as degrees are to diplomas, micro-credentials are to digital badges, right? So the diploma is not the degree, it's the vessel, it's the artifact that communicates about the degree. And that's what we feel about badges too. And so somebody could come up with a better technology tomorrow, badges could go away. And so I guess just as a way of contextualizing the conversation of whether it's badges or something badge adjacent, how it can change
It's a
things.
problem to be solved. It doesn't matter whether you're using a nail or shovel or a hammer or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that way, I think that on the technology side, I think what it can do is help with trust,
Hmm.
right? That professor from MIT, like I also went to, a top name brand university, and I have some grades on my transcript that nobody should trust. Like they basically, my macroeconomics professor felt sorry for me. He was trying hard. He's coming to all the office hours. He's not arguing to get his A minus raised to an A because he should have gotten partial credit on this answer. I'm sitting there like I got an F minus minus on this, but I walked out of the quiz thinking, he said, "What am I not getting here?"
Right.
He's like, "You're not going to major in econ, right?" Absolutely
Right.
not, sir. Like that. So I got a grade. Like if they were to issue a badge with evidence, like they wouldn't. They would be hard pressed to explain how I earned my credential, right? And
Yeah.
so and I think that that's, kind of familiar to a lot of people's own experience, but definitely to hiring managers, right? Like they
Yes.
see people self-asserting, I can do X, Y, Z, or, even institutions, at a broad, kind of summative level, kind of communicating that through transcript. And I think that there's just opportunity to, that we have a trust kind of crisis right now, whether it's, people photoshopping a degree or, like in my case, me having credit for something that maybe I don't deserve. And so,
Hmm.
when we look at something like a digital badge, if we're, taking advantage of what, one of the buzzwords in the industry right now is credential transparency, right? So in there, it's describing what the credentialing program is about. It's saying, here's the earning criteria. This is what separates somebody who showed up and somebody who were credentialing. Like, this is what they had to do in order to earn this. And we're really pushing hard at CU Boulder to attach evidence. Like, and here's how this person who, they did this program, and they learned all about coding in R. And here's a link to their GitHub repository where you can see the project that they did to meet the earning criteria for this. And so I think trust on the technology side is a huge piece of it. And, on the programmatic side, I think that, a lot of it's just kind of market analysis, right? Like, looking around and saying, is there a need here? Validating, yeah, there's a need, and then creating programming that's going to meet that need. Like, and we talked about skills-based hiring. Several states now have, I don't know if anybody's legislated, but there have definitely been several states that by executive order said state agencies have to do skills-based hiring.
Right.
And no more using a degree as a proxy unless it actually requires, you can hire a doctor who didn't go to medical school, but
Yeah.
for this other job, listed by the skills, not that. Well, the SHRM had a report, I think January of last year, where they said over 90% of employers are implementing or intend to implement skills-based hiring, well over 90%. And the same report said that 7% of hiring managers know how to do that. And so there's a huge gap in the ecosystem, going back to that point, right? And huge opportunity for higher ed. We need 100% of hiring managers to know how to do this, not, less than 1 out of 10. And so that's just a great example of where, that there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity, especially for, progressive, institutions of higher education who are seeking new revenue verticals to offer programming that's going to meet that need, to upskill hiring managers on how to do skills-based hiring.
Something that you said there it's kind of making me think about, I think about someone who is in college, right? And say they're earning micro credentials. And I know today that employers are not, we're at a very embryonic stage, I think, in terms of employers being able to ingest what is contained inside of a badge in terms of credential data, regardless of what type of credential it is. It could be a micro credential, it could be a full-on certification, some industry certification or whatever. What do you think industry and higher ed could do better in terms of working together or addressing that intersection? Because I see that as kind of a hot spot in terms of how credentialing using digital badging may evolve going forward. Because I see the work that goes on in higher ed, and I see how employers are embracing it. And I spend a lot of time sort of with a foot in both sides of that ecosystem. And I'm just curious what your take is on that intersection and what should employers, I guess the real question I'm getting to is, what should employers be thinking in terms of that intersection and digital credentialing?
Specific to the consumption piece that you mentioned, Jim, I think that, when we talk about, eating our own cereal and not just issuing, digital credentials, but being able to consume them as well, one of the biggest things that needs to happen, and this is me just borrowing from way smarter people's ideas. The Digital Credentials Consortium out of MIT published this Last Mile to Hire report last year, that says, basically, it comes down to the HRIS. These HR, information system vendors don't necessarily have an incentive to do the R&D to develop, these products until, clients demand it. And so we have a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of dilemma. And so, I anticipate that it's going to take a couple of those 30,000 person employers, or in one of these states where the governor has, done an executive order saying we need to do skills-based hiring, that their chief human resource officer, figures out that I've got a major barrier to implementing this mandate because we can't do it at scale unless our HRIS consumes these. And so I think that, the conventional wisdom in the space right now is that as soon as a couple of those huge clients go to their HRIS providers and say, we'll give you 18 months, but we need to be able to consume, digital credentials about skills assertions that, are machine readable so we can scale skills-based hiring, that's going to force the, vendors to develop the software that's capable of doing this, and that it'll probably snowball very quickly, right? They just need one big incentive to get started, and once Workday does it, everybody else needs to do it, or they're at a competitive disadvantage. So honestly, I think that's a big piece. And I think the other side, on the more programmatic side, is similar to the market scan. We're seeing with groups, not just, we're seeing the homegrown stuff internal at places like IBM, Google, PricewaterhouseCooper, really great stuff that clearly people are into. Salesforce, right? Like, they're not having to really advertise these, and people are coming, right? But when we talk about higher ed and employers working hand in hand, I think it's really about, the best success cases that I'm reading about are things where they're starting from the very beginning of backwards designing from high needs jobs that they're struggling to fill or struggling to fill well, and saying, okay, what do we need to people to show up with on day one? And let's backwards plan from that, so that, essentially we can offer learners a really high degree of assurance that, there's a, temporal proximity, if you will, to the consumption, which is a Nate Otto term, that, basically you're going to earn this credential and it's right away going to serve as a currency for you. In this case, because this employer is waiting to hire you because they trust us that if you earn this credential, you're going to succeed with them.
Start with the job to be done. What an interesting concept.
Yeah.
And I do think that whole idea of skills-based, I think skills-based hiring could be the thing that kind of pushes this to the next level, because it's the badges provide the fuel for that.
Well, and again, on the incentive structure, just real quick on one other piece, and this is going way afield of my role at Stupol, but when we think about the incentive structures, there's also, on the employer side, especially in a time in, some states where you have 2.5% unemployment, right? Like, you would, to artificially limit your talent pool with these imperfect proxies, instead of just going after the skills, is, kind of shooting yourself in the foot as an employer. And then on the human side, right, on the individual side, that there's just really great data. The Reserve Bank, Federal Reserve of Bank of Philadelphia, put out a report last year, saying that there's, just hundreds of thousands of people who have transferable skills to what they call opportunity professions. So that they're right now in struggling to make ends meet for, jobs, and they could, with skills-based hiring, realize economic mobility on the, bar of, I want to say it was like 43% increased earnings, which, if you're in a low wage job, to right away find yourself making 43% more is economic mobility that's life changing. And so, there's just so many incentive structures that make it kind of the right thing for us to do, just all around.
It does. It does. People are just within reach, and they maybe need two or three skills out of the 10. They already have the others, but again, you have to know what they are, and that's where assessments come in. So we're coming up against the end of the time, and I wanted to talk about that summit that you're putting on, and I think you have two of them coming up this summer. Is that right? One that's live and one that's virtual. Maybe you could, tell us
Yeah,
about
exactly.
what
So,
we'll
so
get.
the 2023 Badge Summit at CU Boulder is going to be July 24, 25, 26 at the University of Colorado Boulder in beautiful Boulder, which, if you've never been in the summer, is pretty incredible. And we had just huge uptake. This will be the 8th year of doing this conference. We, went virtual in 2020 and 2021, and really feedback was keep this virtual even if you go back to in person. So, we'll be filming certain sessions at the in-person Badge Summit that will be available to all of our virtual attendees, and then there'll be dedicated content as well that is exclusive to the virtual conference. Virtual registration is only $100. It's under $300 for in person, and that includes the virtual summit as well. So it's super affordable because just access and equity is really at the heart of what we're doing. And luckily, we've been just enormously fortunate with sponsorship and exhibitors making it possible for us to continue to grow the conference and make it awesome while also keeping it really accessible, price wise to our attendees. And we're doing a little bit more than normal of kind of that 101 just getting started content for people who are just starting to wrap their minds around it. There's going to be everything from kind of awesome presentations to sharing best practices of what others are doing to more hands-on workshop of, okay, you and your team have already got some stuff on the back of the napkin. Here's some expert kind of consulting to help you on what's next. And, then just some of the, best thought leaders, on planet Earth are coming to share just what's going through their minds and the projects they're working on. And, it really is just, I geek out on it every year because it's just, just all these people who I just admire and respect and consider friends and mentors sharing, all the stuff they're doing to change the world. And it's just a great way to kind of have your finger on the pulse of what's next. And so really would love to see people, come and join us. And, and one thing I just would add, since we didn't talk about this, you asked a little bit about higher ed. We didn't really talk about CU Boulder. So just quick, brief things about CU Boulder that I would hope we're doing right that other people can benefit from, and not have to learn the lessons the hard way is just like two quick things is one is the executive championship is just so invaluable. I've been a part of so many projects where the merit of the project is not what really was the determining factor. It was, did we have support high up of people who knew what we were doing, who were talking about it, who were being cheerleaders and ambassadors internally? You before we went live talked about, make it essential to how things are done. And, having senior leaders talking about it, even short of a mandate is a great way to at least make it feel like it's essential to how things are done. And so that's just one piece that, grassroots is great. And it's a constant struggle that oftentimes just becomes, dependent on a single individual's will to keep things, don't you die on me.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that, when we were trying to think about what does a consistent framework look like on our campus for this, how do we, embrace innovation and creativity while also tying strings to people's balloons to, ensure that there's meaningfulness and consistency and worthiness of the brand. And what you mentioned, David, it is really key to us on assessment. Here's what the program is, here are the outcomes, and we are transparently communicating here are measurable outcomes that we are assessing. Mm-hmm. And I think that is just a great kind of, for us, kind of beacon to look at and have that, regardless of length, credit, non-credit, hours, grades, it just really puts all that stuff aside and focuses on, what's credentially about this and how do people who aren't, us or our earners' moms going to trust it.
Yeah, I will say that the work that's taken place there at CU Boulder has been outstanding. It's actually been a point of reference for me for quite a few years. I think because it looks beyond just the higher ed space, right? It looks at the entire ecosystem of credentialing and things of that nature. So I really do look at it as sort of a bellwether of reason and insight, and logic and, just inspiration for, where we can go and what we should be doing with digital badging and digital credentialing. So I appreciate all the work that you all have done there.
No, thanks so much for saying so. We appreciate that. And we have no, ill-conceived, notions that we've nailed it. We are still, we believe that we are still building this plate of the air and then that it has lots of room to grow and improve. And we're learning all the time from our users about what things we need to be doing better. But we're proud of what we've done so far and hopeful for where things are going.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
it's
so much,
such an
Noah.
honor to be with, folks like you that I so admire and seeing people like Margot, from Edelex and all the people you've had on the pod. Huge honor to kind of be included.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.